I want to be an all-weather player. I don't want to say I can only play in India. If I go to England, I still want to get a double hundred on a tougher track. I want to go to Australia and make 100. I want to South Africa and make 100. I don't want to be a home turf player. If the home turf is not suitable, I'm gone. And overseas, I can't play.
Global diversification perspective, you're talking about diversifying across 5-10 different markets, but most of Indian equity investors would be majorly exposed to India market or at max the US market.
We got restless. I got restless in two ways. One, the Asian crisis happened in 98, when perfectly good countries went virtually bankrupt overnight. It was a huge moment of truth. And I remember saying, damn, this could happen to India, and all our money is in India, all our assets are in India, all our business is in India. Suppose our rupee at that time, whatever, 15, 18, goes to 80, 100. What could happen to us? We are like literally in penury compared to the rest of the world. We need to diversify the business. It's too India-centric.
Time to sell, right? Because you are also a big proponent of knowing when to sell.
Of course.
And you've gotten your selling decisions right several times. So what is your framework that you apply today?
First of all, selling decision has to come out of how much is enough. And selling decision comes out of realization that are you even deserving of the money that is there in your P&L? That's how you making alpha in a bull market is damn difficult, because everybody has stocks. You have one, I have a one. Everybody has a winner. It's a bear market where it separates the men from the boys or the women from the girls. That's where the differentiation happens. Buffett's numbers are good because he has sat out the dot-com bubble. He sat out part of the GFC bubble. And now he sat out this whole boom and bust following the Trump crisis by sitting on 50% cash. If you remove that, his numbers are very, very average.
Hello and welcome everyone to the India Opportunity Show. My guest today is one of the sharpest and most respected contrarian thinkers in Indian and global investing. Over the decades, he's built a reputation for calling out bull and bear markets ahead of its time. He's somehow always ahead of the consensus, be it the dot-com burst or the 2008 financial crisis, or even during the pandemic. Most recently, he's been right about Indian PSUs and global tech cycle. On today's episode, we go deep into his macro insights, sectoral bets, and also timeless lessons that he's learned from 30 years in the stock markets. This is not just an interview, it's a masterclass on independent thinking. Hope you enjoy watching. Hi Shankar, welcome to the India Opportunity Show. Thank you for making the time to be with me here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Shrishti.
I want to start with your contrarian thinking and independent mindset because, I heard in a recent interview that you've sold off all your US and India holdings and moved it to fixed income.
No, not all.
Okay.
US I sold most. India I did not sell all. I sold I think maybe 50-60%.
Okay.
So I still have a lot of India exposure. It's not to say I don't, but US I was pretty much out of it.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the thinking that went behind it. What were some of the data factors that led you to make this decision?
So primarily I am a cycle investor.
Yeah.
That's the way I've always, not always, but from the time I could understand how markets work. And markets have an inner mechanism, and they are not random, much as professors in finance would have led us to believe. The markets are not random. There is an inner method. And when you do this for a period of time, then you start to realize that there is an intrinsic method to the market cycles. I'm talking the macro of the market. Small companies have a different trajectory, but broad macro of a market have a cycle, and right from, let's say, the dot-com era up until now, I've followed that, and it's worked out really, really well for me. In the sense that I made this theory, which I called it the lake of returns, but I did not call it in the beginning, but I basically intrinsically understood in the dot-com boom, which started in 97 or so, 98, peaked in 2 years' time. And then, of course, there was mayhem later. Why did it peak? There are many reasons from a fundamental standpoint to attribute a peaking, which is that bubble and valuations and this and that. But I said that you could have said that at any point in time. I mean, the bubble started in 98.
Yeah.
Everything was trading at 30-40 earnings, and we thought they were very, very expensive, like the Indian IT services companies. And I thought, I also made the mistake of thinking they were very expensive. Then they went to 60 times earnings, then they went to 80 times, they went to 100 times, they went to 200 times, they went to 400 times, they went to 600 times. at which point do you say it's overvalued? Because then you have missed out a giant bull run.
Yeah.
So then I said there has to be something more to it than that, more than just the fundamentals and the technicals. And that's when I then looked at market history, and it kind of the beginnings of that thinking started to come that markets have finite returns on aggregate. Stocks can have reasonably, not infinite, but much higher than market return. But markets intrinsically have finite returns. It's a lake, not a endless flow of returns. It has limited capacity for returns. And once you breach the danger mark of that lake, whatever the lake you're talking about, whether it's equity lake or tech lake or real estate lake, commodity lake, you are then reaching a period in which, a point at which that will burst. And that burst, actually, I was just forming that thinking in 99 and by 2000 February, I was looking at the data and the NASDAQ, I think, had doubled in 1 year. And then when I looked at the NASDAQ's history and I normalized the returns, I said, this is simply nuts. No matter how great the era of those tech companies was, which is maybe eBay and Intels of the world, AMDs, Qualcomms, there has to be a finite amount of returns any company and an aggregate bunch of companies can deliver. And I said, boss, this is, I think, way beyond it can sustain. I made that broad thinking. I exited. Now, you can call it luck, you can call it skill, or usually it's a combination of the two things. And the markets then obviously totally tanked from 2000, remained like that for several years. Again, the bull market started in 2003-4. And it was the exact opposite, that the crash in the tech and overall indexes was so much that the returns had become dry. That lake was ripe for filling up. And I got that cycle right. And exactly the opposite of that in 2007, December, when I was sitting in my, in my personal room where a bunch of guys with me used to sit. And I said, boss, this market is headed for disaster. And there was no sign that there was disaster on the horizon. It was simply that India had returned 55% CAGR for those 4 years, 2003 to 7. Your normalized returns of 15%. You're running at 3x. This lake's capacity is 15. You're running at 45, 50, 55. Now, you don't sell at that point. You wait for confirmation of whatever your hypothesis is. And the confirmation came from subprime. So some event will happen to make that balloon get pricked. So that's the way I invest. Company micros are all great, and I have a bunch of companies in India. But the macro in 2004 on the lake of returns, in 2024, in the lake of returns told me, normalized returns in India have come down because of lower nominal GDP growth. Now it's more in the 10-11%, mirroring the nominal GDP growth. And we had return on the Nifty 27% from the start of this bull market. We started in COVID. And small caps have returned 18-19% over a 25-year period. They had returned 48%. You're 2x. I said, boss, this lake is again way beyond the high water mark. Time to lighten up as much as you can. Identical pattern was there in the US market. Now, so I exited what I could in India, many things. I mean, obviously, US is a very liquid market. You can exit everything. India is not that liquid, especially in the smaller mid-cap areas. So you have to be more patient. But now you look back in the last, let's say, 10 months from that peak, those peaks. India is, from September levels, a high. We are still down about 5%. From 0.52 weeks, we are up about 4%. In this, and the US is about flat in the same period. In the same period, other markets have been on a blowout trajectory. I mean, Germany, Italy, Spain, Colombia, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, even China. So, I mean, I'm a global investor. For me, India is my home turf, but not my only turf where I play. My capital is mobile. My capital is uncaged. Now, I've made a ton of money just for that decision that lighten up India, get out of US. You're not getting into cash. You got into fixed income because the world economy doesn't look that hot right now because of tariff wars, blah, blah, blah. good to sometimes play defense. But the offense part has happened in markets which traditionally made me a lot of money, which is India and the US. So that's my broad framework of investing. Within this, stocks are a different game altogether, where I'm happy to hold a number of companies for several years. But macro of the market follows cycles, and I like to follow that. Also, one thing, I can tell you that no matter how much of stock picking you do, and we will always have exceptions to the rule. So let's not go into the exceptions. Every data set will have the outliers. Ignore that. Most of your returns will happen because of getting the big top-down calls right. 60-70% of returns flow from getting the macro right. Which asset class? Start from right at the apex of the mountain. Is it equities? Is it fixed income? Is it REITs? Is it commodities? From there, your returns will start to diminish. If you get the equity call right, it doesn't much matter which equity markets you are long. And as long as you're a diversified basket of 5-10 markets, you're fine. Let's say you got emerging markets within equities. It doesn't matter which emerging market you bought. Most of them will follow the trend of the EM index itself. If you got developed right, there are 10-20 markets in developed. So that's the point, that I have been attuned and used to getting the macro picture clearer before I get the micro. Now, once I catch a small cap bull market in India, as I did during COVID, at the beginning of COVID, I said, this is the era of small caps.
Yeah, you were on TV asking everyone to buy.
Buy small cap, buy small cap, buy small cap. Now, did it matter you bought X or Y or Z? It didn't matter. The index gave you 48%. Individuals might have compounded 75%, 100%. But just buying the index gave you 48%. If you got that one macro call right, you can sit back and go to the beach.
Absolutely.
That's the way I look at investing. It has to be a high return on time. Because look, I want to enjoy the money I make. I don't want to be in front of a screen all day, all night. That's not my mantra, not my calling.
Yeah.
When you look at macros, get the macro clear, you free up a lot of time.
So, Shankar, I would love to go deeper in the global diversification perspective. You're talking about diversifying across 5-10 different markets, but most of, Indian equity investors would be majorly exposed to India market or at max the US market. Talking about different countries and markets is not even on everyone's top of mind, right? So, how does one think about macro, find opportunities globally, and even start looking at which countries are exciting to invest in?
So I'll tell you my journey, and
Sure.
if that can mean anything to the viewers, they can derive or divine anything from it. But I got into this business in 1989 and actually 1990 when I quit my job at Citibank. And I was just 26 at that time. And nobody used to leave Citibank because that was the job
Yeah.
in the
Highly coveted.
highly coveted. And, you're living the high life and, staying in Cuff Parade, and you had a car all at 25, 26 in India of that time to get a car, to have a Cuff Parade, Chamari shed, accommodate. I said, no. I mean, I need to be in the ring itself rather than be outside the ring. And I was very bullish on India's prospects as an equity market. And I said, I can be investment banking. I can be an investment banker. I'll become vice president. I will be transferred abroad. I'll live the expat life. But that's not going to make me seriously rich. It'll make me averagely rich. And it's not going to be that exciting. I found it quite boring, to be honest. When I got into it, and the next 5-10 years were amazing for India. India opened up in 91. And by 98, 99, everything, the Indian tech was booming. But we got restless. I got restless in two ways. One, the Asian crisis happened in 98. When perfectly good countries went virtually bankrupt overnight. It was a huge moment of truth. And I remember saying, damn, this could happen to India, and all our money is in India, all our assets are in India, all our business is in India. Suppose our rupee at that time, whatever, 15, 18, goes to 80, 100. What could happen to us? We are like literally in penury compared to the rest of the world. We need to diversify the business. It's too India-centric. And second was an intellectual curiosity that, look, we have understood Bajaj Auto or HDFC Bank and Gujarat Ambuja Cement and Apollo Tires, all the companies of that, Infosys. Abhi yaar, for the next 20-30 years, ab yahi sab 5-10-15 company karenge, it's too boring, man. I
A
mean,
lot of people have done that. Only focus on buying those companies.
yeah, but I found it very boring. It's too boring.
You had global ambitions.
I just want to learn new things. That's simple as that. I mean, I'm very restless from a knowledge perspective. And I said if the knowledge and the business go hand in hand, why not?
Yeah.
And that's where that journey of global investing and thinking started. So we became members of the London Stock Exchange in 99. We became members of the NASDAQ in 2000. We were the first Indian company until date, I think the only Indian company to be members of the LSE. And I remember going to RBI to ask for permission to set up a subsidiary, and they said, we cannot allow a broker to become open a wholly owned subsidiary. There was no provision in the Indian laws for a brokerage house to open an overseas office. Can you believe it?
How did you manage it then?
Then, I mean, there's a very nice officer at RBI, and he said that, beta, I mean, son, I said, but sir, I want to do it. I mean, how can you say the laws are not going to allow me to do that? He said, you can be an NBFC. I said, I don't want to be an NBFC. I'm a brokerage firm. I'm licensed. I'm regulated. I want to open an overseas office. Then he said, okay, apply in the others category and, we'll make it happen. They were very supportive. Now, of course, they became a category after us. But back then, it was like completely unknown territory. But once you ventured abroad, and then we set up a huge research team here, like 40, 50 member analyst team. We started covering global companies right from Japan, from Sony, right to AMD, to Intel, to Dell, to Amazon, to Apple, to the UK companies, the Barclays, the German companies, the Carrefours, all of those. And the diversity of coverage that we did, and we had global clients doing US equities, doing European equities, dealing through us based on our research. That was a matter of great pride that we're an Indian firm and we have created a footprint abroad. And Barron's wrote an article on us, on our research back in, I think, 2002 or 3, calling our US research the most credible research on Wall Street.
Fantastic.
Can you believe that? I mean,
That's amazing.
And that's Barron's. I mean, that's like the Bible of this business. That was so proud that you go into a developed market, you're a nobody, nobody's heard of you, and you create a name for yourself and thereby for you.
After your Amazon and Apple calls? Or?
It was during that.
Right.
So, but the one that Barron's referred to was our AMD call, which was, on semiconductors, where we made a call that AMD would outpace Intel, and that had worked out very well.
Only if you had held AMD till now.
It's okay. There are many in the middle. So because of that, we just became very globally aware. And I can tell you, I mean, I have not had the occasion to regret that at all. I mean, I got fantastic investments, made a lot of money, but beyond that, the knowledge gained. And also because of knowledge, you also become more humble that you don't know. Yeah. When you're in one little pond, you think you know everything. But then when the pond opens, you say, man, I have no idea what's going to go on in this world. Become more humble, you become more acquisitive in terms of knowledge. It's been a tour de force for me. It was fantastic. And I would say that for anybody wanting to, do that, it's going to be intellectually very enriching, apart from financially very, enriching.
Yeah, absolutely. But you have to be a lifelong learner to be able to do that, right? Not many people, everyone dreams of having that, but I don't think many people have the appetite to actually put it in action.
Everybody wants to become rich, okay? Who doesn't? And I only ask them, how hard are you prepared to go at it? How hard? Are you prepared to go into a cave? Exclude everything from your life. Just focus on that single-minded pursuit of gaining that knowledge. If yes, it's fine. But if you're going to say, no, sir, I have to, wife के brother के भाई का भतीजे का भांजे की शादी और मैं 5 दिन जा रहा हूँ, तो sorry, it's not going to happen. Let's be clear about it. I was an avid cricket watcher. I had a lot of other interests, but in the 90s, I excluded all of that to just focus on this. So that's it. What's the price you're prepared to pay? Every profit has a cost attached to it. This is the cost. And
you're in your third decade into it.
Exactly.
So you're clearly still going strong. But let's also double click on some of the macro factors that you're talking about, right? Give our audience a sense of where your head's at thinking about the world order right now, given that we're in the midst of geopolitical tensions, tariffs, wars. But somehow the markets just keep rallying up. Like the US hit all-time high yesterday. And, this India also has had a great week last week. So where do you think, obviously, this is a phase of maybe irrational exuberance before the music shop.
So I made a presentation in Delhi at the Outlook Money Conference. And that was a presentation which, again, I had been thinking about it. And the title was that in my view, great bear markets are dead. And I analyzed all the great bear markets the last 100 years. And market history is about 100 years, okay, from the 1920s, 30s up until now. Organized market history. In that, we've had maybe 6, 7, 8 major bear. I'm talking global bear markets. And if you further segregate it, 3 or 4 have happened because of inflation, oil prices. 1 has happened because of the GFC, which was 2008. 1 was the dot-com bubble. And maybe 1 or 2 others were, the Great Depression of 29-30. Broadly speaking, inflation is the major problem. War is a minor one because that can lead to other downstream problems like oil. So the 1970s bear market that we saw in the US was because of the Arab oil crisis, the oil embargo, which spiked up prices and inflation and all that. And then, of course, we had COVID recently, which you can't even call a proper bear market, just lasted like a couple of months. GFC.com. Now, the world has gotten comfortable with the notion of the major reason for a bear market, which is inflation. Why? So what is inflation? Inflation is the rate of change of prices.
Yeah.
Now, mathematically, we know it cannot keep continuing at the same pace, right? So something goes from 100 to 120, you're saying 20% inflation. Now, again, you add another 20 to that, that's going to be, whatever, 16%. Then you keep adding 20, the price goes to 200, assuming certain periods have happened, that rate will have become 8%. What are central bankers going to say? Look, we killed inflation from 20% now to just 8%. And scroll out another couple of periods, you'll be down to 6%. Rate of change. That 220 is never becoming 100, which was the starting point of this thing. It's only the rate of change, which is all nonsense. So people say, oh, inflation is down. Yeah, but the prices are up from where the journey started. So everybody, at least most intelligent people, understand this is all a game of smoke and mirrors. Prices never come down. The rate of change comes down. And if you just wait out the period of inflation, optically it will come down by simple additional data points.
Yeah.
Unless you're talking, Argentina, Zimbabwe kind of 2000%, leave that. Those are again outliers. Civilized countries have civilized central banks and civilized policies, and you will never have runaway inflation for decades. At some point, because of the scrolling of data points, it will come down to 5-6%. So markets have understood that don't get fussed about inflation. It's okay. Wait out a couple of quarters, 4 quarters, 6 quarters, 8 quarters. Let's not crash prices and lose money. We just then flatline for that period, which is why you see inflation no longer causes major lasting bear markets.
Right.
Now, then you come to GFC kind of bubble or a dot-com bubble. Now, regulatorily, GFC is probably not going to happen because, again, the Volcker rule and, limits on prop trading by banks and all that have been introduced as a result of that problem. Dot-com valuations were crazy. Now you don't see US tech trading at those valuations, not even close. They're all in their 20s, even they were down to the teens or 30s, but they don't trade.
At a time, you could buy Meta for 3x its earnings.
Exactly. So those bubble days are gone. Markets have again learned that we don't want to pay 500 times. It's just 100 years of history. Nobody understands this. Only 100 years, out of which I spent 35 years. Think about 37 years. Now, we are a learning organism as human beings. We will not repeat the same mistakes in aggregate as humanity. Pandemic, first time big shock. But the worst disaster in my living memory has been the pandemic. Everything shut down. The bear market lasted 1 month.
Yeah, there was such a quick
There was
recovery.
nothing. That's the point. So markets have realized that, look, none of these reasons are so structural so as to have long-term bear markets. What you will have are baby bear markets.
Okay.
4 months, 6 months, 1 year. And that too probably flatlining bear markets. Because again, leverage is the reason why you have big crashes. There are 2 reasons for big bear market crashes. Bubble valuations. Second, leverage in the system. A good company missing earnings or having slowing earnings doesn't fall 50%.
Yeah.
It just kind of goes into a long-term decline. Or Asian Paints equivalents, correct? It will not fall 80% because there's no leverage. Leverage is where banks are overextended or where dot-coms are overextended. Those days we have dealt with. We are not going to repeat those mistakes again, or our intra companies in 2008. Once you remove the leverage in the bubble part of the market, even a bear market will not look like a brutal bear market because prices will not collapse. They will flatline. So if you look at India, on a point-to-point basis, we are flat for 1 year, approximately, give or take 4%, 1 year. Okay, US is also, you might have made a high, but you made a high earlier also. So you come here and you've gone back here. Over the period of 6-8 months' time, you're basically flat. In the same period, other markets are up on a tear.
We
US,
were just talking about
we were talking
Greece
about
about 40%.
exactly. Greece is up. Poland has been a rocket market. South Africa, LATAM is in a stealth bull market. China, HSCI. So now India is flatlining, US is flatlining, other markets are up. India has not fallen on a 12-month basis, but it's not risen. Now, ultimately, you can have an absolute bear market, you can have a relative bear market. So you lose, relatively speaking. It's like an Asian Paints. It will not fall 80%, but it will not rise as much as the indexes will rise. So you're losing on a relative basis.
Or like HDFC that didn't move for
Exactly,
4
that
years.
then move for 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's the same phenomenon. Stocks will not always fall in order for them to be in a bear market. Same with markets. They can flatline and you lose relative points by not being in others' growth stocks or growth markets. That's where India and the US are.
So tell me more about this stock of yours. So then does it mean that unless there are some major surprises, we won't really have severe bear markets and it'll be most likely flatlining of returns?
So there are two ways you can correct, right? You flatline for several years so as to then normalize your return. So India returned in the 5 years or 4.5 years until the middle of last year, 27-28% on the Nifty, 48% on the small cap, which is 2x of your trend returns. That lake is full. Now you're going to see either a collapse or a flatlining. One of the two, or a combination of the two. Outright collapse, probably not possible because there is not much leverage in the system. Small caps were extended, so we saw a bigger fall in the small caps, correct. But leave that aside. I'm talking the big market index companies. What you're going to see is, and earnings are not great, by the way. So last quarter was also pretty tepid. Outlook doesn't look too great. But because there is not much leverage, not much bubble valuations, you will see flatlining, kind of a grinding bear market in which you make plus minus 5% annually, so as to over 10 years from 20 to 2030, you will end up with the same 10-11%. Just that in stock markets, returns are always front-loaded or back-loaded. So you've eaten away all the good parts. Now the bad parts will remain.
Yeah. I think this is a very important reminder for especially people who entered the market just around the pandemic,
Yes.
or it's their first cycle that they're living through, because they might be expecting like a big correction to happen, and so many people come on TV and they're like, we are holding cash reserves because a bear market is around the corner.
Yeah, I know the funds have been holding a lot of cash. I mean, Warren Buffett has been holding a lot of
Yes.
cash.
So what do you have to say for that? Because you said you have some exposure still. How are you thinking about the India option?
No, the stocks I own, by and large, I'm very happy to own. Some, of course, I'll sell because they have rallied quite a bit. I was hoping that they would rally. Some have rallied. But in India, I mean, at a bottom-up basis, I've been a perma bull and I continue to be a perma bull. So I divide my thinking in the big top-down and then there is a bottom-up angle to it. So
Yeah.
I can understand investing is somehow, it becomes bracketed, you are X or you are Y style. I don't have a style.
Yeah, because you've got macro, right? And also micro stock picking
Exactly.
also,
So
right?
I want to be an all-weather player. I don't want to say I can only play in India. If I go to England, I still want to get a double 100 on a tougher track. I want to go to Australia and make 100. I want to South Africa and make 100. I don't want to be a home turf player. If the home turf is not suitable, I'm gone. And overseas, I can't play. Because when you have a range of play and you have good technique, you will survive all markets. And you will always find a bull market, because remember, there is nothing called a generalized bull market. There's nothing called a generalized bear market. There is always a bull market somewhere in the world. There's always a bear market somewhere in the world. If your radar is wide enough and your ability to access that radar points is wide enough, you will find a bull market. I might be bearish on X, but I'm bullish on something else. Might be bearish on crude, but I'm long in platinum. So it doesn't matter. So I'm just saying, you want to be a consummate investor, develop all the shots in the book.
Hmm. And you were also talking about, say, gold, copper, and precious metals having a massive bull run, which we've already lived through.
Yeah.
And some people must be thinking that we've already seen majority of the returns that could have come.
The lake was very dry in commodities.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Very dry, very, very dry. Look back on gold. So my father died in 1981, and we didn't have a lot of savings because he was in a government service in Coal India. And the bank manager advised me I think he made a good advice. It didn't turn out well. He said, "Beta, put most of the money from the fixed deposits into gold." So I swapped most of it in gold, and I was just 17 or 18. That was my first investing decision, and I thought I was going to be making a lot of money. Gold did not even beat FD returns for the next 22 years.
For 22 years?
22 years.
Wow.
Imagine that.
And you kept holding on to it? Yeah.
I bought
because Indians never sell gold.
Exactly. And then the lake had turned so dry in gold that 2003, the dollar started to weaken and gold just took off, which, by the way, was the reason why Titan did so well.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So Titan's rise was because of gold. The gold demand skyrocketed. Titan was there making gold jewelry. They had gone away from making the watches, which was an average business at best. They just started Tanishq. And then gold boomed. And when gold booms, gold demand goes up. Titan was there, branded company, Tata company. It all, the stars aligned. But it had been formed in 1988. It did nothing for like 15 years because gold was in a bear market. Okay, and frankly, it didn't even have that business. So that's the point, that the lake runs dry in commodities, and then when it fills, it becomes a tidal wave. So we saw from 2003 up until 2008, oil which was $10 for 15 years prior to 2003, 8, 10, 12, that was the range, was $150
Yes.
in the middle of 2008.
Yeah.
You're seeing the repeat of that now for commodities. So that's it. I am a cycle player at the top. And then, of course, I look around, I meet company. Like I was telling you, I come to India very often, meet company. I find a few interesting ones. I marry both, top down, bottom up.
Yeah, that's great because you also always say that, every cycle is pretty much 5 years, and every cycle that you just talked about is pretty much 5 years.
It's 5 years.
So then where are we currently at?
We have peaked out our cycle
Hmm.
in India. Now your returns are going to be very tepid on a big index basis. Somebody will say, "Sir, I bought 5 stocks in there." Of course, I also bought stocks in this bear market, and today half of them are up to the limit. So I'm making a lot of money when the market fell.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying the broad macro of the market, the cycle of the market is not supportive of making an annualized 15-18% from here on for the next 3-4 years.
Not even 15-18%.
I don't-
Because everyone, the younger generation expects to make 30-40%.
Again, Shishri, the key in investing is, unless you have good defense, you will not be able to play long innings.
Yeah.
Same as cricket. You don't make a 100 with no capability to play out good bowling in tough conditions for this post-lunch session. You have to play defense. This is the time I'm not talking again, please don't mix up many people mix up the bottom up and top down. Saying from a top down basis, you need to be more defensive. And there is money to be made in gold, there's money to be made in copper.
Yeah.
Why just look at equities? The thing is, everybody talks equities because equities they're supposed to be sexy, right? It's a good talking point in a party and everything.
A table conversation.
Exactly. And it's marketed. Gold is never marketed, right? Copper is never marketed. There's no incentive. But you have to be looking at all other asset classes to be able to keep afloat in a troubled time.
In fact, everyone's talking about financialization of savings, and gold was looked down upon. Just like through this pandemic, where I heard so many people say that, we are moving out of real estate and gold to invest in equity.
And they've done phenomenally well.
Yeah, absolutely. So then also, when you're saying you should play the defense, how can we leave people with some frameworks to think about that? Should they be looking at precious metals then and like
I mean,
looking at
in India, fortunately now there is very good capacity to diversify. You have great equity products, both domestic, to a limited extent you can access global markets. Most of the decent commodities trade here. Copper trades here, gold, silver, everything trades here, oil trades here. Fixed income, now you have at the base, you have a bank fixed deposit, and then brokers and wealth managers do offer you some hybrids and some products which can give you a bit of more risk, but hopefully more return too. So now you have the ability to be able to be very balanced in your play. It's no longer back in the day in India when we started, there was nothing other than just equities. It's become a really nice market. You cannot actually blame it, sir, I don't have money abroad, how can I diversify? Arey, start somewhere.
Yeah.
Again, something is better than nothing. Something meaning buy some global funds or buy some other commodities. I'm not saying at all points they are relevant, but today they are relevant. Why not?
And I also heard you say that you don't even need to go to the level of stock picking in different markets. You just
Wait,
have to bet on the
just
country.
the index.
Yeah.
Index. I mean, I'll tell you an example. Right? I've been bullish on copper and gold. Okay. Now, the second order effect of that is the countries that produce these commodities will also benefit. Now, who's the world's biggest producer of commodities? Of gold? China. But China consumes all of it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you have one or two other countries, and South Africa was the only tradable market I found, which is about 120 tons of gold every year. So I said, if gold is in a bull market, I have bought gold, but what's the next behind that? South Africa. Look at South Africa. It's been on an absolute tear. Same with copper. I'm bullish copper. Now, who's going to be the biggest beneficiary? Chile. Look at Chile. It's a vertical chart because the commodity has knockoff effect on the economy. Everything, the trade balances change, the budgets change, the whole society gets uplifted because of their main product going into a bull market.
Like a rising tide.
Rising tide. So then I play the country also, which makes that commodity. So you get one trade right, you can go downstream, but I don't have to go and buy the copper miner there.
Yeah.
It's a waste of time. The index is good enough.
But even to identify these opportunities and to know where to invest is, unless someone's reading your Twitter feed where you're talking to the 4 a.m. bacha party. And now let's talk about that because I found it quite hilarious how you refer to your audience as bacha party. Where did that stem from?
No, it's just that, in COVID, most people who came in are practically half my age, if not less.
Yeah.
So I just said, and again, remember that, I'm in my early 60s now, but I want to be relevant even to somebody entering today. I can't be talking the language of a 30-year plus in experienced investor because then I will lose a lot of the young people. They'll say, no, sir, only you can do it. Why we can't do it? So it's in a way to make yourself more approachable,
Accessible in that sense.
Exactly.
And where did the 4 a.m. theory come from?
4am is something that I found very powerful. It started from the Amazon trade in 2001. It again came to the Apple trade in 2002. When 4am is basically an existing company which goes through a cycle of boom and then gets flamed out because of a variety of reasons, macro, micro, debt, blah, 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 blah. But then you start to watch out for a spark that can bring it back to life. So it's gone to 4 a.m. 4 a.m. means you're close to dawn, but not yet dawn. Now there are no guarantees here because it's a really risky framework, which is why I don't say you should be practicing it at home. It's like those stunts which you see the disclaimers.
Yeah.
But even if you have to do it, not more than 20% of your investable capital should be in them. And they are so low that even if they fall 50%, which some can, which means they go back to midnight from 4 a.m. instead of going to 6 a.m., you won't lose much because you've put so on 20%, you lose 50%, and it's not going to be 100% of the 20% that you lose 50%. So even if you lose that, it's 5-10% of your capital will go, which is nothing. We can survive that. But on the ones, even if you get, let's say you spent 2% on each, so you have 10 positions, like occupying the 20%, even if it just goes up 20 times, it's a lottery ticket for you.
You're playing the power law to your advantage.
Absolutely. And people look at equity investing differently from derivatives. I look at equity investing exactly the way I look at derivatives. For
That's
example,
interesting. Yeah.
I look at these positions as really deep out of the money call options. That's the only way to look at 4 a.m. bets. They'll go to zero, the call option. Here, they won't go to zero. That's a big difference. I'll lose 50%. But they are so far out of the money that even a moderate change will explode the price dramatically. So I am risking only the premium on this, which is my 1-2% per position. That's the way I look at 4M investing.
Can you give us some examples? Because Amazon and Apple are fairly talked about.
So I put in $1 million in each, which, I mean, you might say it's a lot of money, but it was 4 crores back then.
Yeah.
Again, you don't have to put in $1 million. You can put in whatever you want to put in or whatever you can put in. But based on whatever data we had, they both looked amazing bets.
What changed in those companies at that time?
So Amazon in the dot-com bust was crushed completely.
Yeah.
It had a lot of debt. The bonds were trading at 19% yield. Imagine a 19% yield in US dollar terms, close to bankruptcy. But what changed was, I remember that our analyst who was covering Amazon came and told us that based on the quarterly filings that they had made in the 10Qs, the company had turned cash flow positive. It was a company which was supposed to have gone bankrupt. Mary Meeker, who was the Morgan Stanley analyst at that point, had written a report saying that she was a big bull on the company, and she said, "I'm throwing in the towel on Amazon." Business Week ran a headline saying, "Can Amazon survive in that 1 month?" I love that. That's like the starting point of a 4 a.m. trade. Street sentiment is abjectly negative. When my analyst came in and said, "Sir, they have made $135 million in free cash." So I told him, "If you're wrong, I'm going to kill you." So he said, "No, sir, let's write to the company and let's see what they say." So we emailed Bezos and his, I think, CFO. And then they replied that we'll do a call and all that. We did a call with them and they confirmed that, yes, this figure is correct, that our math was not wrong. Obviously, they will not give you forward-looking stuff, but we just needed confirmation that, boss, we are not some idiots making a big error in our spreadsheet. They confirmed it, and that was it. That was a good enough trade. Stock is all-time low. Street is betting on a bankruptcy, but a company that makes $135 million in cash in a quarter is not going to go bust.
Yeah.
So once the bankruptcy risk is off the table, $15 should become $30. That was the bet. So put in $1 million and you say, okay, chalo, kuch nahi to, we won't lose much and we might make $1 million. It made like dozens of X's after that. Now that nobody knows. But that's the way 4 a.m. works. Apple was exactly the same. Steve Jobs had come out of retirement, hibernation in 96. He could not fix, despite all the things. It struggled till 2002. That's when they launched the iPod. And again, the iPod numbers started to kick in 2 quarters after they were launched. And suddenly the numbers started to climb.
Yeah.
And then you did back of the envelope numbers and say, if they make so much per iPod, and you don't need to be mathematically like to the decimal places. Just the broad ballpark is good enough. And that was it. Stock all-time low, unloved stock. And the one thing I always look for is street sentiment on Bloomberg. So if all analysts are negative, that means that itself is a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah.
So media is negative, street is negative, good enough. And then the numbers are positive. And it's a huge arbitrage available. I mean, Tata Motors in 2010 was identical. Again, they bought JLR. Didn't look like a great acquisition. Even I didn't think it was great. But I saw the models in London. I was very impressed. And I asked my analyst that if they do instead of their 0.3% market share globally, suppose 1% ho jata, to kya ho jayega? And we just did back of the envelope numbers on the phone. And he said they'll make like at 3% market share, they'll make like $1.5 billion. But let's say 1% bhi hota hai, they'll make $500 million. Street was betting on £1 billion loss. Uske samne mein my number showed that, or our number showed that $500 million. I said, yaar, 500 nahi, 200 million bhi karega. It's a swing that matters.
Yeah.
And that was it. So 4 a.m. is going to be a lot of misses, but you need only 1 out of those 10 bets to fire.
What are some unloved spaces that you're looking at right now?
No, so unloved on a macro basis, Greece was definitely one what we were discussing. Turkey was one when I went there first time in my life in 2022. I was buying furniture for my home and I went there and I found a country which supposedly had 80% inflation. Currency had collapsed. But I met the companies there, not the company, but I met the manufacturer of the furniture. They said we are flooded with orders, cheap currency is driving business. I saw huge tourist arrivals. The airport was booming. It's a massive airport. I look for those signs in a country bet. If you have a weak currency and you have giant tourist arrivals, and then because of tourism, you also get a real estate flip because people in India, they're capital controls, but many countries, travelers don't have.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a beautiful place. Let's buy an apartment here. So ऐसे करके there might be 1,000 guys buying or 2,000 guys. Suddenly then real estate turns. So once you have tourism booming, cheap currency, real estate booms, these two are the two key multipliers in an economy. Tourism and real estate. If you get those two cycles right, downstream then paint companies, then transportation companies, food companies, hotel companies are all outcomes of tourism and real estate. Basic bet, unloved country, everybody has written it off. Classic 4 a.m. country bet. Greece was the same last year in September. And Greece is up, I think, some 40% from there in September. Turkey, I bought it, I think, $18 in the ETF. And I sold a couple of years later at 32. Better than the Nifty returns.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, नहीं जाता है.
So many people travel and, everybody, especially my generation now always wants to travel all the time. But no one's going and picking up on these nuances.
No, but I just talk to people. I talk to the taxi driver, I talk to the cafe guy, I talk to the hotel reception.
Yeah. So it is a combination of luck and skill both.
I mean, it's being curious.
Hmm.
Just, I'm very curious to know
Yeah.
what's happening, क्या हो रहा है, what is interesting, what is good, what is bad. Because we don't, again, as India or Indians, we have been very closed in our mindset. It's a giant country. We are circular economy, literally. We buy from each other and sell to each other. And that's pretty much what the economy is about. But when you travel abroad, you learn many things. But I'm not just looking at the quality of the beach and the hotel. I want to go a little bit more.
Absolutely. And I think that is something definitely people should learn from you for sure. But when you're also talking about time to sell, right? Because you are also a big proponent of knowing when to sell.
Of course.
And you've gotten your selling decisions right several times. So what is your framework that you apply today?
First of all, selling decision has to come out of how much is enough. And selling decision comes out of realization that are you even deserving of the money that is there in your P&L? That was a primary decision that in 2000 February that I made, that I had put in some, I think, 20-25 crores in the tech stocks in India, a bunch of them. And they were up like 20 times in 2 years.
Wow.
And suddenly I'm looking at my P&L and I'm saying, that's $100 million bucks. 26 years ago. I'm just 35. And I'm saying to myself, and this is not some valuation notional number. This is cash in the bank, literally. If I sell everything with the press of a button, I get it in the bank on T plus whatever 5. I'm saying, I'm an idiot. How can I be worth so much? I just got lucky. I had a hot hand, like a gambler at a table, and you're winning big. I think this is it. I mean, I don't deserve this money. And that was the primary reason. The cycle and the returns were all additives. But the core was, bahut ho gaya yaar. I mean, no, this is not even, it doesn't even look legal that you can make so much money, So that you have to have a very grounded sense of your own capabilities in investing.
But some people would get very confident that, this is all because of how I know and how well I timed it. But it had an opposite effect.
Absolutely. I always believe that ki thoda dar ke invest karo to you will last longer at the pitch.
Yeah.
Overconfidence. I mean, I've seen it in my life also. My worst trades or my, let's say, loose shots will always happen when I have played a good innings prior in the previous innings. I'm complacent, I'm overfed, I'm well-fed, I'm lazy, my footwork is not good. And I go chasing a ball outside the off stump and I'm gone. Instead of that, if you come out of a tougher period or you make it tough on yourself, you are more careful in your play. So thoda dar ke invest karna chahiye.
And beginner's mindset and humility.
And I went to a casino only once in my life. when I was in school.
That's surprising, given that you wanted to get into very risky
I
investments
know,
at one
I
point.
know, I know.
How
Like,
is that?
I went with my father to Nepal, to Casino Nepal. That was the closest one to India, and he took me to the casino, and I gambled at blackjack and all that, and I think I made 500 rupees or something. And the next night I lost half of it, and that's when I did a stop loss. That I said, done ho gaya, abhi chalo, let's go and buy something, in the shops tomorrow. But I figured that 500 rupees in school was, I'm talking 1980, 80. It's a lot of money. Again, I'm not capable of this money. You see, so being grounded, being humble, these are basic qualities in investing. Don't become complacent.
But clearly, something in your life teaches you that, right? Because not everyone knows that, when they are seeing these kind of highs, or like, in their PNL is looking so healthy that, they could attribute it to themselves.
Let me give you a simple example. And we all look up to, or looked up to, Warren Buffett and his numbers and all that. But do you, or frankly, nobody knows it. I'm writing an article on this also. Most of his gains don't come out of the investing piece. Most of his gains come out of the disinvesting piece, meaning sitting on cash.
Right.
This is a very interesting data. If you look at the aggregate of, let's say, from 1980, 81, when his big boom started, and you disaggregate the data, it is just having sat out bear markets or bubble markets that has made him the biggest alpha.
Okay.
Because the biggest alpha you will make is when markets tank 20, 40% and at least you remain flat. So that in the next bull market, I'm starting the marathon at the 20th mile, while other people are still struggling to reach the race because of the losses.
Yeah.
That's how you making alpha in a bull market is damn difficult, because everybody has stocks. You have one, I have a one, everybody has a winner. It's a bear market where it separates the men from the boys or the women from the girls. That's where the differentiation happens. Buffett's numbers are good because he sat out the dot-com bubble. He sat out part of the GFC bubble. And now he sat out this whole boom and bust following the Trump crisis by sitting on 50% cash. If you remove that, his numbers are very, very average.
That's very refreshing, because everyone thinks that it's the consistent compounder.
No. See, again, Buffett is a fantastic marketeer. He knows that if he says this, it won't actually sell well. He's the ultimate marketing guru. Buying and holding great company, fluffy company, branded, blah, blah, blah. People like that. People don't like to hear that before a bubble, go into cash. What do you mean go into cash? I will ride out the bubble. People have overconfidence, right? But if you look at his numbers, and that's the way I have seen my numbers also. My best year was 2008, when I was up like 150% because I was short. Because I got the trade amazingly well. It's another matter I didn't flip quickly enough at the bottom, but that's okay. But if I'm up 150% when the market is down 60%, I'm already way ahead in the race.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Avoid these big losses. You are already winning this game hands down, but nobody talks about it.
Yeah, but like, to contextualize it in today's time, if you're talking about flatlining of returns, should one be sitting on cash?
No, there are other bull markets. So cash is only one deployment. Cash doesn't mean cash. You can do fixed income. Now in India, if you've done fixed income, depending on what instruments you chose, you made between NBFC and good banks and all that, 8-10%, which is beating last 12 months Nifty returns. Plus, if you had spiced it up with a bit of gold and other commodities, you were making 15, 20, 30%. So blended, you were up 15, 18%. Instead of just being wedded to one Nifty and its cohorts.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Cash doesn't mean physical cash. I mean, cash means some other interest-bearing passive income or another asset class.
Yeah, like Warren Buffett was also investing in buying the yen currency.
Correct.
And
Correct.
making all the trades around.
All the trades.
Yeah.
All the trades.
And he's also, like, everyone talks about getting your big wins right, but he's also sold so many companies, right?
His average holding is 2 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Contrary to what
That's
is...
why people don't talk about that enough.
Exactly. 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point, that you have to separate the lore from the reality. So one is this average holding period being just 2 years. People think it buys and holds forever. That might be only 2 or 3, 4 companies out of maybe 500 decisions. So, and the other thing which I really was amazed at is most of his alpha comes from actually being a bear. Let's put it this way.
Wow, you're reframing him as a bear.
Today he's sitting on 50% cash.
Yeah.
Is he a bull or a bear?
Yeah, absolutely a bear.
It's very, very clear.
And what are you in today's market?
I'm a hare, as I've always said. So
You're bullish on some other market.
I'm bullish on some other things. I'm bullish on Indian small caps. I hold them. Like I said, some of them are limit up today. I love what they're doing. I'll continue to hold them. But on macro basis, I'm better off being elsewhere.
And what's the longest time frame that you've held a company?
Oh, there is a company I hold, at least 3 companies I've held for 15 years now. And I might have put in maybe 5-10 crores and they're up, I don't know, 200 times.
Wow.
So there are things I will hold on for a long time. But there's also, since you asked that question, it's a very important thing to tell viewers. Just like you have lack of returns in stocks, you also have lack of returns in markets. You also have lack of returns in stocks. I call it the theory of return decay.
Right.
Returns from stocks have also a period of supernormal and then an emptying out of the supernormal. And the data is very, very staggeringly clear. And this is, I'm revealing the keys to the kingdom.
Yes, would
Okay.
love to know.
Okay. So, most companies, again, eliminate outliers. People, again, I find average, sir, but ये तो उसके ज़्यादा हो गया था. अरे होगा. World is not a 100% systematic approach. There will be outliers to every data set. But the broad data tells you in stocks, and this I've done over 35 years of data, that once a stock in a small cap range delivers between 150 to 200% CAGR over 5 years, that's the maximum you can expect from a stock for a reasonable length of time to come.
Okay.
And for a large cap, the number is half that. If a large cap has done 75% CAGR over 5 years, that's pretty much it. Then it will flatline or decline for the next 5 years.
So contrarian to the consistent compounders approach. Yes.
Exactly.
Let's talk about that. I want to go deeper.
Because I look at it only very simply for that, the next 5 years, I was better off buying something else which did not have return decay associated with it. So I am really making my money work hard. I sweat it. So 5 years, 150% done. Boom. Today, as we speak, one of my stocks reached a point of 190% CAGR in 5 years. And I have been selling. This is it. Now, can it go to 250% CAGR? It could. What are the probabilities? I would think not more than 20%. It's a game of probability.
Yeah.
As long as 80% probability nazar aata hai ki this is the way it's going to pan out, I am good with it. Outliers are fine. Ignore them. So return decay for me is as powerful as the lack of returns. And I follow both these theories from a purely data angle. Like I said, I'm not emotional about investing. For me, it's all a bunch of numbers and data and statistics. That's all it is.
Yeah, you seem very detached from the outcome. You were very focused on the process, but very
process.
this is what the Bhagavad Gita teaches us. So you achieved it.
I don't know. I have never read it, by the way, but I do believe that broadly speaking, it's common sense is what was written in the Gita. And I think life is also common sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And, because a lot of people don't really know how to think in probabilities, right?
Exactly.
Let's share how you even build that muscle in you.
I did not build it myself, to be honest with you. I found an amazingly bright guy who is half my age, who works with me, who's an engineer, comp science engineer. And he was the guy who changed my thinking. This was about 7-8 years ago. Because before that, we were coached and taught in certainties rather than uncertainties. Then you मेहनत करोगे, companies में मिलोगे, research करोगे, numbers देखोगे, and then you buy it. You have confidence, you have what was the word called? Conviction.
Conviction.
The most idiotic word in investing is conviction.
Private markets, we still use that and abuse that.
What the hell is your conviction has nothing to do with what's going to happen, right? I can be convinced about the crappiest company in the world. It has no meaning. It's only ego. Your conviction is nothing but your ego, your self-belief. What is self-belief? You will be found out tomorrow in the field. I don't want all those nice woolly sounding words. I just want data. Let's talk only numbers. And it's when that guy said this, sir, you don't understand. This is only about probabilities. That's all it is. And then this was like a light bulb moment for me. I said, man, we have been taught this whole Buffett-esque or Phil Fisher and all this great company, hold forever, blah, 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 blah. I said, kuch nahi hai, sir. Data ko ab dekhoge to there is a bell-shaped curve, there are outliers, and that's pretty much what the return profiles of markets and stocks are. And suddenly it changed my view of investing.
So, what changed?
Earlier, I was more driven by the certainty of my belief system. That if I have done my work and I'm convinced that the company is good or this is good, that is good, outcomes will follow that. What that taught me is that it might follow that.
It's also wishful thinking in one way, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
वो वही बोलते ना दिल बहलाने के लिए ख्याल अच्छा है गालिब. You're from Lucknow, you will understand the शेरो शायरी.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all दिल बहलाने का ख्याल होता है. It's all probability, and that light bulb moment changed the way I look at it. That's when I started to look at especially the riskier parts of the investing this thing as call options. कि call option ही है ना यार. Worst case, DK होके zero हो जाएगा. Best case, they will make 100x. Rather than believing that every investment has to have a financial investment and then a baggage of emotional investment layered on top of that. Sorry, no stock can take that much.
Yeah, let's talk about emotional regulation a little bit because people tend to fall in love with the companies they back, right? And you've always spoken about to have this healthy form of detachment. So,
I am
how did
super
you?
detached.
Yeah, with how?
I'm very neutral about all the companies I
Is it because your allocation is not sizable enough to a particular company and that?
No, they have
Okay.
become very sizable. They don't start out being sizable. So I will never put 25% into a company.
Yeah.
That's all completely insane if anybody were to do that. It will become that, or it might become that because of price performance. But in any case, I will still keep trimming it as I go along. So people talk about holding something for 20 years and you made 1,000 times or 500 times. Yes, all well and fine. But don't hold the same quantity from the beginning to the end. So your average will not be 500 times. Your average should be more like if it made 500, it should be at 100x because you kept exiting through the
Yeah.
journey. So that's the way I do it. And I followed it. And I have no desire to say that I could have made X amount of money of 10x if I had held on. No, sorry. That's all hindsight. You had no idea. So the detachment simply comes from the fact that I just say that they are human beings. They will falter. And plus that every company and this founder, promoter dealing with a million variables, many things can go wrong. Regulations can go wrong. Cycles can go wrong. So why get so over-invested emotionally? Because the more investment, financial investment we can exit, but emotional investment is impossible to exit from. Impossible. Because emotions, hai, pyar, mohabbat, ego, everything is in that little cocktail. It will prevent that sell button.
That's why a lot of people who I've had on the show say that, we never even meet the promoters to have that objective lens.
Actually, you don't need to meet companies.
Yeah.
By and large, especially the large cap companies, a waste of time to meet them. I came to this realization 25 years ago. Because first of all, the companies, especially the bigger companies, they're not going to tell you anything negative. In fact, no company will tell you anything negative. Second, they don't even know what is negative. Most companies, especially in India, have not found them to be great macro analysts. That's not even their remit.
Yeah, they get blindsided off it.
जैसे एक ही बिजनेस है ना, अब स्टील चला रहा है तो स्टील अच्छा ही लगने वाला है ना, ऑटो चला रहा है, कोई जीप बना रहा है, कोई गाड़ी स्कूटर, तो सबको हाउ कैन ही से दैट नेक्स्ट ईयर लुक्स टेरिबल. सीमेंट कंपनी को अच्छा एक बार नहीं, एक क्वार्टर खराब है सर, लेकिन उसके बाद रेंज ठीक हो जाएंगे, हो जाए कंस्ट्रक्शन बूम एक्टिविटी, सम डेटा पॉइंट यू विल पिक अप टू सपोर्ट योर व्यू. It's a waste of time to meet the bigger companies. Small companies you do need to meet because quality of promoters is untested and all that. But yes, I agree with the notion that by and large, which is why I say that, country investing or top down is so much more efficient in terms of time. I don't have to meet anybody to invest. I'm going there to have a holiday. In the process, I'm meeting the taxi driver and the cafe owner. That's not work, right? That's
Yeah.
just chit chat.
That's what you would do, chilling.
That's all you would do anyway. Or karoge bhi kya वहाँ पे? So otherwise, meeting companies can actually blindside you.
Hmm. And when you, because you did say that you come to India often to meet these small mid-cap companies.
Yes.
What is your filtering criteria today? Has it evolved over a period of time, or what are you looking for when you meet?
Just experience tells you what you don't want to do. So some businesses may not be interesting enough, especially businesses which are very consumer centric. वो store खोलेगा, आज 5 store है, कल 50 करेगा, फिर 500 करेगा. I don't do that because I am a skeptic by nature in all of these things. And like I said, थोड़ा डर के चलो तो you're better off in investing rather than be foolhardy. So I'm not a believer in that kind of thing that take big wild 5-year bets. Everything is a collection of numbers which I will see and evaluate and make my decisions. So the filtering is that 80-90% तो यार करना ही नहीं है. Ab initio, they're out.
Which would the sectors be which you would rule out? Because you were like, I met Mr. Bayani today, who you also know.
Kishan?
And yes, and he was talking about, obviously he's opening up many stores, and Broadway is his new initiative, which is scaling well. And he also told me the same thing, that Shankar will always give you the truth, because he told me too. And you just said that you don't want to invest in these kind of businesses which are expanding stores.
So there is okay, let me qualify that statement.
Yeah.
My thinking also, because of the probabilistic switch going on in my head, has also started to include over the last 7-8 years some bets on things that I may not even like much. Call option ही है ना. Let's get a toehold in. You never know what will become a huge one. When you have a toehold in, you can scale up the position once that wild thought becomes a more real thought. So again, when you start to look at investing as a series of call options rather than equity bets, the thinking changes.
Yeah. So that is the place to start if you want to start thinking in probability.
In probabilities.
Then you were following the data and not
Correct.
remove-
So मैं अभी today, I mean, I'm not saying that I will do everything that comes my way. I'll still eliminate a fair bit, but I might do more things than I might have done 15 years back, where I needed a lot of conviction. Convinced होके मैं करूंगा. I have loosened that standard कि अरे चलो थोड़ा बहुत डाल के देखते हैं boss. You never know.
Yeah.
So that is where the thinking and probability thing has crept into my frameworks. Which is
Going a little deeper on the sectors that you wouldn't touch. Let's talk about those.
see again. This is I wrote an article in Business Standard, a few months ago, a few weeks ago, that in India and the US, both countries have had the two best performing equity markets in the last 30 years. And the reason for that is very simple, that both these markets have had a plethora of services companies. There are virtually no manufacturing companies worth the name. There are a few in India, there are almost none in the USA. In the overall indexes, they used to be 25, 30 years ago. In America, 40 years ago. But Dalal Street and Wall Street killed those businesses by choking capital from them and pushing them into the sexier, light, capital light businesses. जिसमें brand है, जिसमें tech है, जिसमें scalability है, ROI है, free cash है, and we choked those businesses which were then outsourced to China.
Yeah, in fact, I read that article and you spoke about what China got right in multiple ways also in that.
Well, they didn't get it right. We just gave it to them. So America gave away, when the bull market in America started in 1980-81, after 10 years of bear market, that boom, which Wall Street, obviously Wall Street is that engine which drives the boom. They said, we don't want these businesses, the General Mills and Kapda and making toys or all of that. China said, okay, we'll do it for you. Fantastic. So suddenly all the factories went to China. America was left with the brands. Warren Buffett went and Peter Lynch went and bought those brands. And they made a ton of money, but it hollowed out your industrial base that went to China. Same thing. So Wall Street ruined America's future in that way. It created a stock market boom. But now they struggle because they don't manufacture anything.
Now they want to
bring it. It's not possible. Same thing in India. 91 bull market started. Now, what do Indian companies do? Look at the index composition of Nifty 96. It's horrendous in today's You have Videocon International, you have Balarpur Industries, you had some chemical company. None of those exist. Capital just went away from them and was replaced by HDFC Bank, by the Infosys, by the Bhartis. Reliance also is less manufacturing, more services now because of Geo and retail and all that. So now we have hollowed out India. We don't have manufacturing because we ourselves, all of market participants, don't want to put money into these capex companies. बहुत capex करता है यार, debt लेता है, never has cash flow, never generates free cash because all the cash goes into putting up new capacity. We starve these companies of capital, and then horror of horrors, we crib private sector capex बढ़ता नहीं है यार. अरे बॉस हम बढ़ने ही नहीं देते हैं ना.
Yeah.
हमको चाहिए ही नहीं कंपनी. जो कंपनी हर साल में एक प्लांट डालेगा स्टील का, हम तो कभी लेंगे ही नहीं लाइफ में. I mean, I'll give you our example or my comms example. In the 90s, India didn't have a big formulations business, Indian pharma company. They were bulk drug company, which is basically the less sexy name for APIs.
Yeah.
We used to tell all the pharma company, क्यों करते हो ये सब? This is a commodity business. You should go into formulations, make your sales force, become branded, become FMCG equivalent companies. A marketing engine, Sun Pharma or Dr. Reddy's, this, that, they were all bulk drug companies. They said, great. So, sabne jaake, they started giving it out to a small Hyderabad or a small Gujarat chemical company. So they outsourced all of this. Then when those companies didn't have enough capacity, they went to China. As a result, today, your companies are primarily bulk drug, formulations companies. They are marketing company, FMCG companies. All the bulk drug is in China. China turns off the tap. You don't have APIs.
So does listening to investors make you ripe for disruption?
100%.
Yeah.
But then promoters also in the business to make money. They would not have got the 5 lakh crore market caps if they had stuck to bulk drug and formulations. So reduce the balance sheet, improve the cash generation, improve the ROIs. How do you do that? By giving out, outsourcing all these commodity businesses.
But then promoters also need the funding, right? So if investors are
Not going to give them.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. So Wall Street and Dalal Street, it's worked out well for us.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'm talking more on a national basis. The countries don't become great because of services. They become great because they make things.
Yeah.
And we hollowed it out. So to ask the question, what kind of companies do you invest in? I don't want to have investments in companies that manufacture things. Most of the time. I have a few.
What would you say companies like Bajaj Auto, for example?
I have nothing but the greatest admiration for Bajaj Auto. I think that's the only, as a group.
Because it makes such a sizable chunk of our manufacturing capability.
Precisely. And
Yeah.
and that is about one of the rarest exceptions. I can tell you where I am proud as an Indian that we have companies like Bajaj Auto.
Yeah, because very rarely do you see exports being driven out of Indian companies.
And R&D.
R&D.
R&D, not just exports. I mean, and I don't say this today, I've said it for 30 years that Bajaj Group is the best Indian group that I have ever seen outside of HDFC in the services part. They are ROI driven, they run tight businesses, they generate capital, they generate cash. Even in manufacturing, Bajaj Auto was a cash generation engine. Back in the 90s.
22% are
Huge cash. I mean, their return on operating assets. The cash was weighing them down, which is why they had the split and moved the finance part out and the manufacturing part out. We used to tell them that, boss, ये इतना cash है, उस पर ROI आप पर नहीं बनता है. Operating asset पे they were making 80%. Imagine that in a manufacturing company.
Yeah.
Insane. And the R&D, the Bajaj Pulsar, the DTSI, those are game-changing innovations.
Yeah.
So yes, those are the exceptions.
But yeah, only that came to my mind right now.
Well,
Which are the
Well,
companies
well
that
to be fair, if you see, India's two greatest manufacturing successes have been basically in the autos.
Yeah.
So you have Maruti,
Hmm.
okay, as a huge giant company which we have to be proud of.
Yeah.
And then the downstream ancillaries to Maruti, and then the two-wheeler boom of the 80s, which created the, again, downstream ancillaries and created the TVSs and the Bajaj Autos and all of that. Outside of that, we don't have much manufacturing.
But why only auto and why no other sector?
Because the 91 liberalization created the bull market. That's when we guys came into the being and we started preaching this वॉरेन बफेटी वुली फ्लफी बिजनेसेस, खाली ब्रांड होना चाहिए, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग नहीं करो, वो आउटसोर्स कर दो, चाइना को दे दो, इसको दे दो, उसको दे दो।
But why
तो
does,
हम जिस डाल पे बैठे थे हमने उसी को काटा है अपने हाथों से।
yeah, but why does India not have tech companies that are like billions of dollars of market cap or trillions for that matter? Because the US, even while it was doing that, pushing manufacturing away, at least got it right with the tech companies. Like you see Max 7.
But consumer tech,
Yeah.
they are not deep tech, they are consumer tech, likes, clicks, shares, all this again,
Yeah.
superficial consumer,
All
again,
about engagement.
all about it became consumer tech. So you had the Cokes and the Pepsis, which were the more manufacturing part of it. And these became the same customer who was buying Coke and Pepsi, became your likes and shares and Facebooks and Amazon shopper.
Yeah.
But they remained reasonably capital light because there's no capital required in that business. And the tech is not super high tech. I mean, what's the big deal? China has got TikTok.
Yeah.
China has got all of these companies.
But then they're not very promoter friendly.
Who
In
mean
China.
China promoter is a commie
It's the
party.
government.
That's it.
Yeah.
They decide what is right and what is wrong.
Very interesting. So, we've covered macro, micro, stock picking also, and then also thinking about, some of the India, China, and other things forward. But then if we just zoom out 5, 10 years hence, where do you think we are headed now for India specifically?
Okay. India needs to up its play big time if we have to be relevant in this world. Again, don't get me wrong, I'm an Indian, mainly because I live abroad doesn't change anything. I want my country to do phenomenally well, but I only fear that we are not thinking hard enough of what the future lies. We are an IT services driven engine and its offshoots. If you look at the prosperity that India has had in the last 30 years, IT services have contributed the bulk of it.
Yeah. But it's at a sharp decline.
That is exactly where the problem is. So if I were making policy, I would have a bunch of think tanks bringing the best of the Indian diaspora, the best of Indian tech brains, the best of Indian stargazers, making proper, sort of literally incubator of ideas. And then, this is very critical. The government should be the investor, not private capital. Private capital cannot and will not fund deep tech and long dated payoffs. You go, you know the VC ecosystem. Go and say, I want to do deep tech and this tech. And then सबको consumer tech करना है, सबको food delivery करना है.
In fact, most consumer funds have been raising in the last 2, 3 years, and every family office that I talk to, it's super bullish on Indian consumption theme. But then we are completely missing out on the deep tech, quantum computing, all those.
Because those are such long dated and very uncertain payoffs that nobody wants to take the risk.
Yeah.
Who will take the risk? Look at the history of India. All innovation, I wrote that in the Business Standard article. Go back from 1947. All the innovation has come from the state-owned companies or the government. Same with America, the DARPAs and the NASAs, and the other sort of the universities. All of it state-funded, or only indirectly public, private funding, because only the government has this capacity to fund long-dated, big, moonshot ideas. Because that's an exchequer which has no ROI attached to it. The government spends money. Do you go and ask the finance minister, okay, so tell me what was the free cash generation? Kitna ROI bana isme? Nahi, there's no forum. Company डालेगी, fund डालेगा, fund के investors, company के investor पूछेंगे every quarter में, okay, so what happened to that moonshot idea?
Yeah.
And if it fails, you're finished, you're useless, you're stupid. Government fails, it's okay, we understand. So the government has to fund, it has to become the venture capitalist. Venture capitalists actually don't do venture capital, at least the way that will further national interest. China, look at all these companies, all have had Huawei. Look at the support they got from the government in the beginning. That's how it became a global champion, not on its own.
Yeah.
That's why it's still a private company. So government has to, like building roads, 11 lakh crores is all well and fine. Say 50,000 crore up set aside karo to become a venture capitalist. What?
We are trying to do that with the Space Tech Fund and Deep Tech Fund. 1,000 crores or
Yeah,
so.
in this budget of 500 crores for AI.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very minuscule.
there is nothing.
So, what do we need to do to win the AI race? So,
We need to really form these think tanks, ideate, generate ideas, build blueprints. Exactly what we did at independence, what we did when Rajiv Gandhi became prime minister. He built those telecom mission. We started building our Param, which was a supercomputer. We need our own supercomputer because the US would not give us Cray computers because of Pokhran. You know, so we need to get unshackled from the Western, holds on various critical technologies.
Yeah.
So we need the same thinking. When we say Atmanirbhar, we have to be in every way completely self-reliant. And for that, we need capital. And the capital has to come from the national budget.
in one sense, we are setting up our own fabs, etc. Here, you don't see that being hopeful.
No,
Yeah.
we have to do a lot more.
Yeah.
First
Scale needs to be.
of all, I'm saying nations that become great are nations that are paranoid. I'm telling you.
In India, we keep applauding ourselves.
And I say that is a fundamental problem. Even businesses that become great are always paranoid.
Hmm.
Ki who's the guy who's going to disrupt me? Kya change hoga that I'm not foreseeing today? As a country, if you look at US, it's always paranoid. It has thrived on paranoia.
Andy Grove famously said
Exactly.
that only the paranoids.
Only the paranoid survive. So it's the same China. China's thing was we can't rely on foreign technology. They will shut us off. They will kill us. You read the book on Huawei, that's exactly what the founder Ren says.
Yeah, I think China has been super paranoid in all of this, right?
But that's why they have kept
yeah.
going up and up and up.
Now I think they have several leap decades ahead when it comes to even nuclear power.
Exactly, because they have been paranoid.
Yeah.
US will choke us one day, which they have.
Yeah. Yeah, like one tariff shift and like
exactly. Or suddenly you will say, I will not give you this. The chips won't be given to you. NVIDIA ban kar do. We have been doing that.
Yeah.
So if you're paranoid, you are more prepared to deal with the future. We need that paranoia. We don't need self-congratulatory messages all over social media. Koi meaning nahi hai.
Yeah. And Shankar, coming back to investing, because now you've done it for so long, but how do you think it will change with the advent of AI? And there's a lot of talk around quant investing, and some would argue you've been doing quant investing and data-driven investing for all these years.
We have been doing it. I mean, we were actually in our fund, we have used AI from 2018 itself, 19 itself. So we have been very early adopters, and I'm a complete believer in it. There is no doubt in my mind that most human beings involved in this business will become irrelevant, apart from IT services, which is fine. But even in finance, the need for big research teams and all of that is really, really no longer relevant. It's unfortunate. It's scary.
Yeah. So how does one prepare for that environment?
I'll tell you how to prepare. So this is I was at a dinner in Dubai, and the daughter of a friend of mine, she was going for engineering, and she asked me, Uncle, what should I look to work in when I finish? I think comp science. And I said, you're not going to have a job after 4 years in all probability. So she said, then what? I said, exactly. Now that you know this, the blueprint is very simple, that the world will still need people who can ideate, who can talk well, who can read well, who can write well, who can stand up in a group of 500 people and make a fantastic pitch. Those skills are not going to be done by AI. The needle of the world's excellence will go back to humanities, away from technical skills. Last 30, 40 years in maths, PCM and all of this, that is becoming irrelevant. That on the touch of a button, you get all data, all research. But to put it to work, to put it to use, to ideate from that, to build that take that as a foundational thing and build something fantastic out of it, that AI will not do for you. I said, start building your skills on that front today. You will be the only person who gets placed from campus. I'll guarantee you that. And she said, oh, I never thought of that. I said, you have to be paranoid. All your friends are going to be in La La Land because they have got in BITS Pilani a com science course. It's irrelevant. What if at the end of it, coding to sab ho hi raha hai na abhi. 4 saal ke baad the models will be like of a different level.
Yeah. In fact, you can write code even today.
And imagine what's going to... Yeah. I was in HCL in my first job, and I remember the first computer we were making were 8-bit computers. Intel 8084 was the processor. it was like the equivalent, I don't even know. I mean, it's super slow, and that's exactly where your LLMs are today, the 8088 or the 80186 level processors. Imagine 4 years from now kya hoga. But the soft skills, the humanity skill, the idea to, the way to create, to ideate, to make connections, come up with fantastic business ideas, that skill, if you have, you will be relevant.
Yeah. And I think to your point of HCL, I interviewed Mr. Ajay Chaudhary also.
You were
And
there at that.
yes,
Yes.
and he spoke about how the UP government at that time took 26% ownership in HCL,
In
and that is what really got the ball rolling for
Correct.
them, right?
Yes.
So that goes back
In
to
the Noida factory.
yes. So
Yes.
that goes back to your example of the government
The
pushing things.
government has
things
to be the
forward.
government. So yeah, I mean, to make yourself relevant, you will need to have soft skills, which we have forgotten in the last 25, 30 years of this.
Yeah, because Indian parents just want
Only tech, sab
and
PCM karo, PCM karo,
then
PCM
go
karo.
get a job in big tech.
Correct,
That's been
correct.
the
I think
dream.
that trade is over. The needle will swing back to the softer skills.
So now in your life, in your 60s, what is the North Star that you're working towards?
Oh, I have plenty to do. I mean, so I think if you followed me on Twitter, I mean, I'm very interested in neuroscience because my daughter was born with certain brain challenges when she was born during delivery. And doctors told me that nothing can be done about it. I mean, she had virtually no vision when she was born.
Oh.
And I'm not the kind of guy who takes no for an answer. And I said, this is rubbish. My daughter will see. I will get her vision back. And now that's a big goal. Today, 20 years later, she's got almost 80% of her vision back.
Wow.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
And this was obviously a lot of your funded research, or
Yeah, I mean, I did it myself. I
you
got
did it yourself?
Yeah, I did a lot of research. I did a lot of travel, met companies in Europe, in Turkey also. And then I got stuff made, equipment made, which regenerated the part of the brain which was damaged. Now she's recovered 80% of her vision.
Wow.
And then other parts of her body, which were also because of the brain, then it controls limbs and everything. So neuroscience for me occupies most of my living hours. I'm deep into that, and medical science is just zero in that. They don't understand the brain.
Yeah.
So you have no North Star there. You have to do the research. And many doctors themselves are surprised when I talk to them. They said, we have no idea what the hell you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, it's possible. So I'm very driven by that. And the work that I'm doing on neuroscience, while it is benefiting my daughter, it will benefit many, many more children and adults also, because stroke is another major problem.
Yeah.
I mean, that for me is something very close to my heart. It starts everything. Look, the best things happen because you want to do it for yourself. I mean,
And nothing more compelling than a child's
exactly,
right?
exactly.
It
So like,
wakes you up. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So like, I have this coffee company in Europe, which I started because I didn't
I
like
saw it's become world's number 75.
Yeah, it's doing very well. I mean, on the stealth, it is
And that too from Greece?
from, just, it's like 2 hours from in North Macedonia.
Okay.
So, because I didn't like the coffee, I don't like this coffee because it's too bitter. It's
Let
burnt.
go room. No.
It's okay. I'm just pulling your leg. But, and I said, we can do better coffee. We have to find a better way. And that's when I started to get into it, into food science, food chemistry, talk to scientists. They had no idea. But, and I made the machinery, custom made it. So I do a lot of things like
You're
that.
a builder at heart.
Yeah, I like
So
doing all that. For me,
so-
investing is literally 5 minutes of my time on a weekly
It's
basis.
the easiest part
It's
of your
very easy. There's no big deal, यार. ये तो कुछ है ही नहीं. इसमें क्या इसके लिए पूरा दिन लोग क्या करते हो ये समझ में नहीं आता.
So this is the cue for the audience. Don't leave your jobs to jump into full-time investing and trading.
It doesn't require full time. I'm 100%. And today with the amount of tools available, I mean,
Yeah, and you started at a time when none of this was.
nothing was there. Companies didn't even have analysts or IRs and something. कुछ भी नहीं था.
Yeah. Well, Shankar, this has been fantastic. I'm truly honored that you took the time out to share this
thank you.
timeless wisdom.
Thank you for having me. And yeah, I mean, you're yourself an entrepreneur, and I was asking about yourself. And tell me before we go that what are your goals? You're still in your early 30s.
Well,
How has been investing for you?
Well, the goal for me for this show specifically is to give people a front row seat to people like yourself. I call you guys visionaries who are shaping India's future, because I do believe that a lot of things that we ended up being taught while we were growing up are radically changing in how, and to give people an access to how some of you think in terms of timeless principles and evergreen content is the goal of the show. But ultimately, the goal is to keep compounding these good things, right? Like, whatever, I believe if you're a good investor, the same timeless principles you can apply to your life,
Oh.
and it enriches you in so many different ways,
100%.
right? So I'm also a builder at heart. I'll continue building and hopefully keep contributing back to the people.
Fantastic. I wish you all the very best.
Thank you very much, Shankar. It's not every day that you get to sit across from your icon and ask them all the questions that you wanted answers to. And that was the day for me today. If you enjoyed watching this episode, please remember to subscribe to our channel so that you get notifications every time we drop another one.